late this afternoon, another development came out of Fulton County in that trial before the trial that we've been monitoring. The U.S. District Judge Steve Jones, who's tasked with granting or denying Mark Meadows' request to have his trial moved to federal court, filed an order asking for more information from both parties, information that he says he'll need before making a ruling. Now, it's a singular question on a singular issue, which I'm going to ask our experts about in just a moment. But before I tell you about that, there's been a cascade of vital new information from inside the courthouse yesterday. This is still the Meadows case, giving real shape to Meadows' strategy and how the district attorney, Fani Willis, plans to maintain control of her prosecution. Now, we should acknowledge that Meadows' decision to take the stand at all was remarkable. It was a gamble. It was seen as a last-ditch Hail Mary, chips on the table legal strategy. Meadows risked a lot, though through almost 4 hours of testimony, including cross-examination. Equally astounding, though, is the big picture. This trial before the trial, so to speak, was the very first time a Trump associate has testified in open court about the disgraced ex-president's actions after the 2020 election. In his attempt to convince Judge Jones that his actions were made in his capacity as a federal official, necessitating a move to federal court, Meadows repeatedly insisted that there was a federal nexus to everything he did. He also argued investigating voter fraud was actually something of a side task for him. It was kind of a chore, something he needed to cross off the list in order to get Trump to focus on other pressing matters. Quote, "I just needed to land a plane," end quote, as Meadows described it. And therefore, the defense argues that Meadows' duties were federal operations. Georgia prosecutors, though, about half a dozen of them at the hearing yesterday, took exception to that, arguing the intersection between Trump's administration and his campaign means that the scope of Meadows' day-to-day responsibilities went far beyond his role as a federal official. We're also learning more about what the Georgia Secretary of State, Brad Raffensperger, provided to yesterday's proceedings. We understand the state played 4 clips from that infamous phone call where Trump asked Raffensperger to find him votes. Raffensperger testified that the level of outreach to such an extent from Trump's team was, in his words, extraordinary. Again, this is going to be Judge Steve Jones's decision to make whenever he decides to make it. He's made clear that moving quickly is understandable given the timeline. And that was, of course, before we found out about this potentially shifting timeline for everyone's trial to begin on October 23rd, whether or not that happens. But given how little case law there is to rely on and the monumental nature of this decision, he's taking his time. Until he has his answers, he's not going to do it. So Meadows, at the moment, stands ready to be arraigned next week. The judge has basically said, if I don't have an answer for you on this, you need to go and get yourself arraigned the way you're supposed to on September 6th. Glenn Kirshner's with me, MSNBC legal analyst, former United States attorney. Carol Leonnig is with us, the national investigative reporter for the Washington Post. And Tamar Hellerman is with us as well, senior reporter for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. And Tamar, I want to start with you, because you've spent time watching this in court. It's hard to distinguish between all the legal things that are happening in the country around Donald Trump right now. It's like a pigpen dust cloud. But this is actually kind of fascinating. Mark Meadows, the former chief of staff to the former president, in a little mini trial. He's getting cross-examined. He's talking about where he was and why he was doing it, largely to make the argument that you people in this court should not have jurisdiction over trying me. Tell me what you saw and witnessed and experienced.
Well, the former chief of staff provided a real window into what his job was like as Donald Trump's top aide, particularly in those last weeks of the administration. He talked about landing the plane in terms of sorting out who won the 2020 election, but he described it as part of kind of one of many duties that he was trying to accomplish in those last couple weeks, especially as they looked ahead to the peaceful transition of power. He almost made it seem like he just wanted to get this out of the way so that they could focus on all those other things going on. And so this was kind of a to-do to get out of the way, and that's why he was involved in this. He talked a lot about how being a chief of staff required him to know what was going on in every aspect as much as he could, and kind of looking around the corner and anticipating what the former president might want to know about. That's why he said he went to go visit, for example, a Cobb County audit of absentee ballot signatures here in Georgia right around the Christmas holidays. He said that Trump did not direct him to go, go, but he was already in town visiting his adult children, and that he figured that Trump might ask him about it, so he wanted to get ahead of the curve.
Carol, it is interesting because Mark Short has commented on this. Mark Short, obviously, ultimately working for the vice president, former Vice President Mike Pence. He says, well, let's play it. Let's listen to what Mark Short had to say.
I do think one challenge for him is to say this is all my official capacity. If that was true, then why was he circumventing all of White House counsel's advice? Why wasn't Pat Cipollone involved? Why wasn't that team involved? Why wasn't DOJ involved? Instead, Mark recruited outside lawyers who he wanted to listen to.
And so I rely on you, Carol, as a veteran reporter. There was a time when the chief of staff to the president of the United States was the big office. They were not taking orders from other people. They were the one who was telling the president, this is out of line, can't do that. And to Mark Short's point, this is not Mark Meadows' business to be doing on his own. There is White House counsel. There are other people he could have relied upon. So it's kind of interesting how he's trying to paint the whole picture of the Mark Meadows show, trying to land the plane, just trying to keep everybody in order, doing my job.
Absolutely, Ali. And you know what's interesting about the landing the plane statement is that while Meadows testified in court the other day that he didn't necessarily believe all the fraud allegations, but he felt like it was his job to be with the president, to figure out whether some of them were true, et cetera. What he was saying behind closed doors to people that we've spoken to in the White House was landing the plane was, let's get to the transition. Donald Trump is going to keep complaining that there's a rigged election, but we are going to be transitioning and leaving this White House on January 20th. That is what landing the plane meant to many of Mark Meadows' compatriots in the White House who were essentially, I don't want to say indulging Donald Trump, but sometimes sort of patting him on the back and being like, okay, you think these were rigged. We have no evidence of that, but okay, good. We'll keep looking into that. That was kind of the role Meadows was playing. I do think that Mark Short has a really interesting point because while George Terwilliger, an excellent seasoned lawyer who's representing Mark Meadows, makes this pretty strong claim, hey, it was all part of his federal job, Short is saying a lot of this looks political. A lot of this looks like it wasn't a executive office of the president role. I do think that there's a challenge for Fani Willis here because some of the things she claims that Mark Meadows was engaged in sure don't sound very criminal. Visiting an area that was auditing things for whether or not signatures were properly verified, arranging a phone call, attending an event and a meeting with the president, visiting another meeting with the president, that is pretty much official biz for most, in the main. I want to also just say one more thing about your previous section, the breaking news. Mm-hmm. That is really important because the story that prosecutors want to tell is the full story. And if they have to tell this story 19 times or 7 times, it's a mess. I would just point to you something at the end of Fani Willis's motion to the judge in which she essentially asks for the chance to get clarity and also the chance to speak and argue about severing anyone from the case. That basically she just needs a chance to make her arguments for why severing is not going to work for her. It's one thing for somebody to say, I need to have a speedy trial. It's another for a person to say, I want to be separate from the rest of these folks. And there may be a very good reason, as Glenn pointed out earlier, to tell that story once and tell it with everybody in the chair.